Funding for New Mexico in Focus is provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, early voting is underway in the primary elections for governor. Two Republicans make their cases to take the state in a new direction.
If we don't fix these problems early, fixing them later is going to be far more difficult.
This state has gotten very good at spending. I don't think we've gotten very good at investing.
Plus, a former GOP lawmaker analyzes new polling that shows shifting support in that race and a ton of voters who haven't made up their minds. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nash Jones. We are kicking off our candidate interviews in the race to become New Mexico's next governor this week, with early voting underway at county clerk's offices across the state. So we had plans to introduce you to all three Republicans in the race tonight, and we were on track to do that until frontrunner Greg Hull pulled out. His team canceled our interview, citing an unforeseen urgent conflict. And when we tried to reschedule, his campaign manager said he was just too busy. We are trying to work something out for next week when we are set to interview the two candidates in the Democratic race. We would like you to hear from Hull, the longtime former mayor of Rio Rancho, and we will keep our fingers crossed that he makes the time. We are grateful that his two competitors did just that. Tonight, you will meet small business owner and charter school advocate Doug Turner and cannabis CEO and former state cabinet secretary Duke Rodriguez. In addition to hearing from the candidates, we will spend some time examining the race with political analyst and former Republican state representative Greg Payne. We'll chop up what the latest polling says about where the contest stands today and ask Payne about where it may be heading in the final stretch to primary election day. But we begin with the candidates. First up, Doug Turner. Doug Turner, thanks so much for joining us on New Mexico in Focus. So you've run for governor before, but that was about 15 years ago. So I'd like to start by just having you introduce yourself to our viewers.
Sure. 16 years ago.
16.
Yeah. So I am a native New Mexican. I was born and raised here in Albuquerque. In fact, my parents live in the same house in Old Town that I grew up in. I am a businessman. I own a communications and public affairs firm based here, although we do work in about 50 countries now, 40 countries. I have a background in real estate, commercial and residential real estate development, and I also own a company which the state classifies as light manufacturing. We build custom Land Rovers that we sell all over the United States. But I have been involved in Republican Party politics really since I was able to vote. I was state director and then eventually campaign manager for Governor Gary Johnson during his two races, although I never worked for the state. And I have, I think played consequential roles on a lot of really significant issues that have come before the legislature and that different governors have had to decide on, everything from medical malpractice reform to the bonding that has built the new UM hospital, to oil and gas issues, natural resource use issues, solar, wind. So I have a pretty good grasp on the state.
Yeah, and you talk about your political background a bit, but your business, Agenda Global, which you mentioned, it's a public affairs and strategic communication firm.
Right.
How does that work prepare you to run the state of New Mexico?
What our company has done over the years and the issues that we've worked on, I think are highly relevant to the issues that our next governor is going to be facing.
How so?
We have worked on, and I have personally worked on school choice issues for at least 15 years. And I'm a strong advocate for school choice and charter schools. We have worked, managing public policy issues that impact oil and gas, utilities, power lines, wind energy, solar, mining. So we have been, really deeply involved in these issues at the state level and at the local level. And so I think, from a perspective of being prepared for, what a governor will face, I don't think there's any candidate running, Democrat or Republican, in this governor's race that has more experience, practical on the ground experience in this state than I do on these many issues.
And you tout yourself as a local businessman. You also have jobs as a key priority in your campaign. How many New Mexicans does Agenda Global employ?
So here in the state, we're probably about 15 people. So we're fairly small in the state. We also have employees in Texas, in Washington, D.C., in Florida, and in California. So that's largely a function of where some of our work is, and it's also a function of where we've been able to find staff. So, I'd love to find more here, but we do have an education problem. Preparing kids for the workforce, and that's been one of our issues.
Yeah, let's get into that. So you mentioned school choice is a priority for years. You previously served as the board chair for the Public Charter Schools of New Mexico, where, according to your campaign, you fought for parental choice, higher standards, and accountability.
Correct.
How would those policy priorities show up in the New Mexico public education system if you were governor?
The state right now has a failing public education system, and we rank it number 50th in the nation. But it's not new. We've actually ranked 50th in the nation for about 30 years. And so there have to be some fundamental changes, I think, that occur across public education. This doesn't mean that there aren't great schools in New Mexico. There are great schools. Rio Rancho Public Schools is great, and the superintendent there has just crushed it. Um, but we currently move kids through our public education system, grade to grade to grade, without ensuring that they have the skills necessary at whatever grade level they're in. So, for example, we currently have 47% of our third graders who can't read at third grade level. That's pretty shameful. Our biggest competitor over the years in terms of who is doing the worst in education is Mississippi. Today, Mississippi has enacted some fundamental changes, ending social promotion. They probably hold back 10% of their third graders to make sure that they have the skills to move forward. Today, Mississippi is at maybe 15 or 16 in the nation. So it's really a miracle. We need to hold these schools accountable. I think if we have more charters and more public school options for kids and parents, you increase competition among those schools, and you ideally drive them to higher performance.
Well, and now your kids attend private school and one in a boarding school out of state. What would you say to a public school parent who says that means you don't personally understand what it's like for folks like them to fight for equitable education in the public school system under
Sure.
the Yazzie Martinez lawsuit?
Sure. I attended public school myself. I went to Albuquerque High School. I went to Jefferson Middle School before that. And, I had every intention of putting my children in charter schools, but they did not get through the lottery. And I was not prepared to put them in an educational environment that I felt was failing our kids. So, I have been through that process. I didn't get any special treatment because I was board chair of the charter school organization. I made the decision to put my children in private schools. But that doesn't mean I'm not aware of what's going on in these schools. I mean, I have been in this public education fight in this state for at least 25 years, and in a leadership position where public charter schools, some that serve specifically Native American children, since you're talking about Yazi, some that serve kids from rough backgrounds. We've got charter schools that educate kids who dropped out of school because they've had babies. We have a mechanism within the charter school community to provide solutions that are broad based and yet focused on what kids need. And what I have seen generally is that general public schools, traditional public schools, are not meeting that demand.
Now, when I talked to Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham after this year's legislative session, she basically argued that they're on the right track, that graduation numbers are going up, that reading comprehension levels are going up, but that it was such a deep hole to dig out of that time will be on the state's side. What do you make of that argument?
So I think on many levels, she's right. We are seeing improvements. There have been, I think, significant efforts at APS to increase accountability, make sure that actually that graduating actually means something. But the hole is still very deep, right? I mean, the progress that's been made, is not an excuse for the last 30 years of
But
failure. It's just
would you keep on that same track? What would you do differently?
Well, I think I would work to end social promotion. I think, Deb Haaland, one of my Democrat opponents in this race, has proposed giving teachers more, I mean, giving students more tools. Look, I think we can have, as many tools as we can come up with. We have no shortage of money that goes into public education. But if we don't fix these problems early, fixing them later is going to be far more difficult, which is why I think we need to deal with an intervention at third grade. It needs to be aggressive and, whatever resources it takes with these kids, but if it means holding them back, then we hold them back. At the same time, I think we need to change our charter school law and allow replication of really great charter schools. Right now, it's prohibited. If you're running the best charter school in the state, Nash, you wouldn't be allowed to have a second one. And so that is, the priority of every public school needs to be its children, not a fight for cash.
Okay.
Right. And
Well,
that's kind of what tends to happen.
alongside education, jobs are one of your top issues. What's your plan to increase the number and the quality of careers available to New Mexicans?
I think that there has been a tendency to look for, what I call these sort of unicorn employers, the next Intel that will hire 3 or 4 thousand people. And I think that's all fine and well. We trip over the luck log every once in a while and we get something juicy. But the reality is that most of the employers in the state are companies like mine. There are small companies where, adding one person across 1,000 companies my size is a lot of jobs. Like it's consequential. And I think that a lot more attention needs to be paid to what small companies need and whether it is, someone holding their hand as they walk through, the quagmire of bureaucracy to get something done, at the state or local level, or fast track permitting, for example, or help someone holding your hand while you get your brand new restaurant kitchen permitted. I mean, the small businesses need those resources. My firm did an industrial revenue bond 2 or 3 years ago to build our offices downtown. Well, apparently today, I learned yesterday that to do that now requires that, you have contractors that are paying a prevailing wage, right? You can't just go bid and find the best product for the best service for the best price. That, in my mind, is counter to what the things that we ought to be doing to support small businesses.
Okay, so cutting that red tape, that's the bulk of what you see as a potential
Well,
solution.
the other piece of it is taxes. We are the eighth highest tax burden state in the nation. We have the highest personal income tax in our area. Texas is 0, Colorado is 3%, Arizona is 2.5%, and we're 6%. So, if you want to find ways for individuals to put more money back into their businesses and back into the economy, you've got to lower the tax burden. Same thing with gross receipts tax.
Well, moving on to public safety, which you've argued during the campaign is deeply connected to both jobs and education, what we've spoken about so far. What's the right balance between prevention by combating poverty and enforcement, like more stiff penalties?
Well, first of all, we need resources and support for kids who are heading down the wrong path, and dropping out of school, finding a handgun and going to a skateboard park and shooting somebody. I mean, we need those kinds of wraparound services and more aggressive intervention at a young age. Um, we need to address our mental health crisis in the state, which I think is a contributing factor to crime. I think we need to rebuild that, and it was dismantled maybe a decade ago, and I think that's
Under
necessary to
Republican
address.
Governor Susana Martinez, yes?
It was, I think that's correct. Now, their justifications were probably valid. There was probably plenty of corruption that was
No,
being rooted out.
no fraud was found in terms of the 15 providers who were accused of Medicaid fraud. That was found to be
Regardless,
unfounded.
we've got to rebuild it. I mean, homelessness is addressed by, in large part by solving a lot of those mental health issues. Now, when it comes to stiffer penalties, I can't imagine that anybody who's committing a crime is thinking before they commit that crime, boy, if I do this, I'm going to get extra time. But I do think we have to reform the 2016, Bail Reform Act, which really has led to this revolving door in our criminal justice system, where a criminal will get arrested, they will be put out on a cashless bail until it's time to, be tried. I think those people need to stay in jail. I mean, if I talk to law enforcement around the state, they are tired of arresting the same people over and over and over again. So it is a multi-pronged solution, Nash. It's not single.
Well,
There's no single answer.
in terms of reforming the bail system, that's been a priority of Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham as well, and she has not been able to get the Democratic-led legislature to pass that. Senator Peter Wirth told me in this session that that was not of interest of his and other Democratic leaders. So if Lujan Grisham has come up against a blockade of her own party in the legislature, how would you, as a Republican governor, find success in that?
I have found traveling around the state that Republicans and Democrats and independents really all care about the same thing. And I think what you saw in this last legislative session, where public and association and advocacy pressure was placed on legislators for med-mal reform, I think the same thing can happen in this instance. It's going to require a lot of work and a lot of campaigning and mobilization on behalf of the governor that is out in the state, not just sitting there trying to wrangle votes in the legislature. It's going to require the public finally saying enough is enough and coming together to place the right kind of pressure on their representatives to make this change.
The initial change, though, was overwhelmingly supported by voters. This was a constitutional amendment that voters passed.
Correct. Yeah, but we it's not like the first time where we've said, boy, I wish we hadn't have done that. I was talking to former Governor Gary Johnson some years ago up in Taos about the fact that when he was elected, we went and made the PRC elected, right? He used to be appointed by the governor, and he, put it out to the voters.
Public Regulation Commission.
Right, the Public Regulation Commission. And I talked to him, this is maybe 10 years ago, and he said, man, that was the dumbest thing I ever did. And so now we are back to a situation where the PRC is actually appointed. Because what we ended up with is people who had no understanding of regulated utilities in office and unable to make good decisions. We have a better system now, and I think it's perfectly normal that government and people in government make mistakes, and I think it's time to undo this one.
Okay, one place where the governor Lujan Grisham and the legislature have been in lockstep is with backfilling federal funding cuts with state funds. Where do you fall on that?
Well, we are fortunate enough as a state to have $72 billion in our permanent fund. My guess is by the time I'm elected, it'll be over $80 billion. So the state does have the resources to ensure that New Mexicans who need the services get the services, and I don't have a problem with ensuring that. But I think the bigger goal needs to be improving our economy, so you have fewer people who are using those services than are using them now.
In the meantime, if you were elected, your administration worked towards that. If the legislature sent you a bill in your first legislative session to continue to shore up SNAP and Medicaid, would you sign it?
Probably. It just depends on if it's by itself or if it's loaded up with a whole bunch of other stuff.
But in terms of those proposals, you do support them.
As long as we're delivering the services that people need and get in this state, then we should be doing that.
All right. And now those federal funding cuts, those are a Trump administration priority. Speaking of the president, you're set to speak at Mar-a-Lago this week with a candidate for governor in Alaska. The invitation calls you in part leaders, quote, poised to secure President Trump's America First agenda. What's your understanding of that agenda, and how would you bring it to New Mexico?
So, my firm does a lot of work in the defense and security space. You know, we have been a prime contractor to NATO for a decade. We work for EUCOM in Stuttgart, supporting the U.S. Department of War. We work for Special Operations Command, supporting, and we started doing this under the Biden administration. I don't see much difference, in the goals and the work that we've done
Is that what
between
you
now.
consider the America First agenda?
Well, I think the agenda that I am an advocate of is a very strong foreign policy that recognizes what the threats to the United States are and what the threats to democracy are. And those are the kinds of things that I have worked on for over a decade. Um, the event at Mar-a-Lago is a little head spinning because I never thought we would be going there for a fundraiser, but it is hosted by a member there. It's not a White House event.
Right, but the invitation does align you with the Trump administration.
The invitation aligns me with a lot of those policies for sure.
And accurately?
Look, I mean, this is the guy who's survived 3 assassination attempts. He's got his own vision, and I think it would be irresponsible for anyone who's running for governor of New Mexico, such as Deb Haaland, to say that they're going to fight everything that the president or the administration does. I think we are going to find that we have great appointees from this president that will impact New Mexico. And Steve Pearce is now head of the BLM. Yvette Harrell is in the administration. I think they're going to do great things for the state. Does that mean everything that every president ever does is great? Of course not. Just like I said, I mean, everything that every governor does in this state is not always great either. Democracy is something that's very special, but it sure is messy sometimes.
Republican candidate for governor, Doug Turner, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It kind of speaks to the primary voter. I mean, none of these candidates have really set the world on fire. Doug does have momentum, but you don't see like the person I'm thinking about is Mamdani in New York, where you had the grassroots on the progressive side just get really excited about his candidacy. I don't really sense that with the grassroots in the GOP right now. Having said, I think Doug's going to win, but I just don't see that energy.
Stick around for our analysis of the Republican primary for governor with former GOP state lawmaker Greg Payne in about 25 minutes. And a big thanks to Doug Turner for making time to answer our questions. Now let's continue with our candidate interviews. Next up, politics correspondent Gwyneth Dolan sits down with Duke Rodriguez.
Duke Rodriguez, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
My first question is about your experience. You've worked in state government, in the private sector, in healthcare, and now in cannabis. Thinking back on your career, what is one lesson from those experiences that shapes how you would govern New Mexico differently from the current administration?
Oh, I think the big difference is I've got experience. I'm not a politician, I'm a businessman. I've clearly run hospitals, built group practices. Heck, I was a cabinet secretary under Gary Johnson. I reformed Medicaid. So you have most politicians who go into this role with expertise in campaigning, in kind of doing 1-second sound bites, and I don't think I'm good at that. What I'm really, really good at is fixing problems.
You and your Republican opponents agree on a lot of things, sort of broadly on crime, education, healthcare, economic growth. Can you pinpoint one important issue where you disagree with them and tell us what that says about your approach to governing?
I honestly don't think we agree on much. You will hear sound bites like, we should increase access, or we should shrink the size of this or that, or we should cut taxes. But what I think that makes the big difference is I've done these things. I don't think any of them can tell you how many Medicaid recipients we have, how much it costs the state. I don't think they could tell you what the split between the federal dollars and the state dollars are in the SNAP program. I know those things because that's what I grew up with. And not as being a cabinet secretary, as being a provider of healthcare services, as being an individual recipient of food stamps, or living in the housing projects in Alamogordo. I think that makes me different. I don't think we're much alike at all. I am not your blue blazer country club Republican, but I've lived the New Mexico experience.
So how would your approach as governor be different?
It would be very decisive. It would be recognizing where our priorities are. I've said this state has gotten very good at spending. I don't think we've gotten very good at investing. And so our budgets grow. We have very little accountability. And I'm more based upon, what do the numbers really say? How can we benefit the most number of people? We've got plenty of resources. Everywhere I go, I tell people, New Mexico is not a poor state. We are absolutely a poorly run state. My vision is to fix that second half and be a well-run state where New Mexicans can not only be proud, but benefit from the largesse that is New Mexico.
I want to talk to you about immigration. Your grandparents immigrated from Mexico. Your parents were migrant laborers. And you've said you support stronger border security, but you disagree with President Trump's mass deportation agenda. You've even suggested a modern bracero program.
That's correct.
In today's Republican Party, how do you balance border enforcement with the reality that many industries in this country depend on immigrant labor?
I'm a New Mexican who knows that our priorities should be first to the needs and the people of New Mexico. It is hard for any New Mexican from any city, town, or village in New Mexico to deny the cultural significance, the tie we have to Mexico, the fact that we need workers, whether you're an oil worker in southeastern New Mexico or involved in our green chili. We need to have able-bodied workers in the U.S. We all agree on the concepts of protecting our borders. We don't want fentanyl. We don't want criminals in our country. But I still believe we are compassionate people that want to do what is right. And so if you look at it, I don't think it's that hard to balance. I just think the difficult part, which is what we need, is not an attitude of saying, I'm fierce, I'm going to stop the White House, I'm going to be a brick wall. That's the absolute wrong attitude. We need to say, okay, I lived this experience. Before you all on the East Coast decide what's right for New Mexico, let us tell you how we are, why we need, and what we do.
On the economy, you've proposed eliminating major state taxes while also proposing major investments in healthcare access, public safety, economic development. But those taxes fund a large part of the state budget. What would you cut, replace, or restructure in order to bring your programs to fruition?
Well, first, to understand the context, what I've advocated for is eliminate personal state income tax. That's not that novel. It's happening like that now in Nevada. It's like that in Texas. It's in 9 states. And it's particularly more common in states who have significant mineral oil and gas. We're one of those states. I've also suggested removing completely New Mexico gross receipts tax on retail sales. Most of your listeners realize we've already removed it on groceries. We're just making that extra step. And then the last thing is to reduce the state's portion on property tax. Now, the immediate conclusion is, what are you going to cut? That kind of fear comes from a culture where we think that everything's about spending. It's not. It's about prioritizing, putting money in the right program, and making sure we get the maximum value from those investments, which we don't do now. People will say, well, how do you feel about SNAP? Are you going to cut SNAP? First of all, SNAP is a federal program that comes primarily from the feds, and the state's primary role is administration. But it has a 15% error rate. We're likely to have that money cut back if we don't control it in the right way of eliminating errors. I would actually like to increase the food allocation because $6 a day is not enough. Now, I could talk about Medicaid forever and tell you that's bigger in total of total services in our education budget. It's $11.5 billion. Keeps going up, members keep going down. And yet, our quality of life is not getting better. So I can pretty much convince you that we're not getting the results that we need from the money we put out.
You often frame your economic goals in terms of private sector growth and entrepreneurship. But New Mexico has one of the largest public sectors relative to its economy. Why do you believe that private sector-led growth would work here when previous governors have struggled to diversify this economy?
Previous governors have been lawyers, have been politicians, lifetime politicians. I don't think we've had a business-oriented governor since Gary Johnson. I don't think most candidates, name any one of them, the DA or the activists or you name them, I don't think any of them could tell you what our 4 major industries might be. For example, oil and gas. We should all know that that's a major sector. How about agriculture? That's a sector, actually, as a young person, I worked in the fields. I'm very familiar with the importance of agriculture, and yet we don't capitalize it. How about healthcare? Healthcare is a big thing. I ran Loveless for many years. I was the Human Services Director or a secretary. Think about healthcare. Largest employer in the state with 150,000 jobs, yet we don't invest in it enough. We have 2 large healthcare systems here in Albuquerque alone, which are failing tremendously, huge losses, which we could talk about. But the last thing being national security. Think about that. Los Alamos Labs, Sandia Labs, White Sands Missile Range, Holloman Air Force, you name it, Cannon Air Force Base. We're always going after that unicorn, and we think it's called Facebook or Project Jupiter. We have the major sectors we could invest in, not spend, invest in, and get tremendous job growth.
Well, I want to stick with healthcare for a second.
Please.
In much of rural New Mexico, healthcare survives because of Medicaid and public funding, especially rural communities. But residents depend on private hospitals and private facilities. If the private market can't make money delivering healthcare in Silver City or Vegas, they just shut down and they leave. What responsibility does the state have to step in where the private market fails?
I think the state for decades has failed healthcare tremendously, and not just the rural setting, the urban setting. Most of your listeners may not know it. For the last 3 years, Presbyterian's health system has lost over $1 billion. UNMH, we're very proud of UNMH and its quality medicine. It's lost $500 million. Either way, their losses are accelerating. So the rural system is important. The urban part is important, but the fact is that they're both destabilized. As a governor, you would want to step in and say, I need this system intact. I need to make sure I give them the capital to invest in infrastructure. Last week I had a friend over at getting an MRI at Presbyterian. They had to wait 36 hours because they have 2 MRI units and 1 was down. That's unbelievable that's going on. Getting a specialist at UNMH now in dermatology, they put out a public notice, 18 months. So my role is to bring all the players back in together and say, hear me out. We are a healthcare state. Hear me out. I'm a healthcare governor, the first we've ever had in the history of New Mexico. This is one of our largest priorities. Lower time to get an appointment, increase investment in these facilities, making sure that there's less fraud and waste, and making sure that we deliver more medicine to more patients.
All right, from healthcare to childcare. You have talked about the importance of work and self-sufficiency, not being dependent on government aid. You've sued Governor Lujan Grisham over the state's universal child care program. But you've also talked here today about how your family benefited from public assistance when you were young. Supporters say without universal child care, they can't afford they can't work. In your view, where is the line between helping families get up on their feet and creating a culture of dependency?
When you talk about universal child care, I believe in child care assistance. I also believe in doing it lawfully and doing it right. And I also believe about being transparent. Most of your listeners would be shocked if I told them the current version of what was crafted unlawfully, announced prior to the legislature even meeting or funding it, which will get overruled by the Supreme Court and set aside. That's a strike on the governor, not on the program. It has to be done lawful, which means we have to have public input, which means we have to have feasibility studies, which means we have to know how much it costs. Right now, I would tell you, what is designed today, irrationally, irresponsibly, and unlawfully, is going to cost more from the state budget than what we from the state budget provide SNAP, food stamps, and Medicaid combined. And that should scare everyone. That's just plain old irresponsible.
Many Republicans face crime in terms of enforcement, weak laws, not enough cops on the street, liberal judges creating a revolving door. But you often talk about poverty, addiction, mental health, and education failures as a source of crime. The overall crime numbers are going down in the state, but what would you do in your first year in office to make regular New Mexicans feel safer?
If New Mexicans are going to feel safer, I don't think it's going to come from spouting statistics. I don't think that's making anybody believe it. If you ask the average New Mexican or anybody driving up and down Central, do they think that there's less crime? The answer is no. They generally have rationalized that people just might not be reporting it. The only way they will feel safer if they see their streets cleaner, if they see less loitering, if they see less encampments. They will feel safer if they feel vibrancy in our economy, that our young people have jobs to look forward to. It's not enough to say it. If they realize their kids are staying here, they will feel safer. They will begin once again to believe that we are putting things into place to bring down, as you discussed, and I will say it over again, crime in a silo is not enough. It won't fix anything. Throwing more money at law enforcement, great. Raising their pay, great. Recruit more patrol police officers, wonderful. But it won't fix it. We have to realize it's not a single activity. It's the combination as you described. If we don't deal with the poverty by having more jobs, we're going to have problems. If we don't have places within our education system that benefit our students, if they don't feel energized, if they don't feel engaged, if they don't have PE or art or whatever, they're not going to feel hopeful, and they're just going to basically rebel and hurt our teachers. If they don't deal with mental health and addiction when people are in crisis, it all will aggregate back as crime. Stop dealing with them individually. Stop throwing at behavioral health money this year. And next season, it's a new juvenile justice bill. You have to realize, we have to finally realize that it comes to the core of doing things better.
Now, you mentioned juvenile crime, and I want to ask you, do you think our problem is that juvenile offenders are not punished enough, or that we're not intervening early enough to prevent the problem?
I think our problem with juvenile justice cannot be picked as one single problem and issue, and this is it, and this will fix it all for everyone. It's not true. I sat on the juvenile parole board, and I was the person that they brought me stacks of documents, 40 files thick, and they said, by the way, we're going to review, and I met each of those young people, and I saw them, and some sounded more remorseful than others, and I really thought our role was to help guide them to their next step. I learned very quickly our job was solely to get 40 of them approved for parole so 40 more vacant beds could be made up. Kids know that it doesn't work. We don't hold them accountable, but we also don't give them an environment to prosper.
Let me ask you about infrastructure and the environment. You've talked a lot about desalination and brackish water projects. They can be expensive, energy intensive, and a little bit controversial. How do they fit into your broader vision for New Mexico's water needs, growing energy demands, and environmental stewardship?
You know, I hear that, Duke, you're just another Republican. I'm not another Republican or another Democrat. I think that the globalness of these individuals is very limited. I don't think it's enough to be the mayor of a small town. I don't think it's enough to be a PR spinster. It takes a little greater vision. I spent a lot of time in Israel. I was impressed with probably the only country in that area that produces more water than it consumes. Big investors in desalination. I believe in also creating more power, not being afraid of bringing enterprise here and say, oh, they're going to take all our water, they're going to take all our power. I think, and by the way, I don't think desal is very expensive. Each desal facility can be built for about $200 million, 18 months from permitting to finished construction. Right now, we are probably 5 desal clinics, desal facilities behind where we should be. El Paso just built the second largest desal facility in the country. We don't have one. I think Texas has got 12. We should produce adequate water. We should produce adequate electric. We have the resources, we just don't have the ability to execute. No more vanity projects, no more rail runner, but actually invest in projects that make life better, not bitter.
Your support appears to be flagging a little bit. You were second in the Emerson poll just a couple of weeks ago and a distant third in the Sandroff survey we saw the Journal published over the weekend. You've had a few controversies during the campaign, including over your residency. Do you think that's hurting you among voters?
Not at all. I think every poll is a snapshot in time. And if you look at it, I think Brian Sandroff said it best, and that's because he said very little. What he said, and Brian is someone I trust wholly. I can argue with what he's got in his polling and what he doesn't. One of the candidates had their TV ads up the week before. That gives you a bump. The real story, what Brian said was the race is up for grabs. We've had a poll at 65% undecided, Emerson had it at 60, and Brian's at 40. It's all a matter of picture of time. You cannot tell me or convince me that less than 400 people will represent the 150,000 that will represent and vote in this primary election. This is the first time in New Mexico's history we have the independents decline to state to vote. Our polling shows where we are. I'm okay.
Why do you think we have so many undecided Republican voters? Is it Trump?
No, I think it's because generally speaking, the candidates have not fully introduced themselves, and generally speaking, I'd like to believe that the candidates suck. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. I don't think the Democrats are that great and the Republicans aren't overly impressive, including myself. But the reality is, we're now introducing ourselves. The day his poll came out is the day we began our TV ads. They're persuasive, they're willing to listen, and our polls are indicating we're okay. So why are they unengaged now? Is because we've done a poor job. Let's see what we do in the next 4 weeks, and let's see what happens on June 2nd.
So today you've talked about New Mexico's problems as interconnected: crime, healthcare, education, addiction, economic stagnation. If you could make meaningful progress on only one of those things during your first term, which one do you think would have the biggest impact on the overall picture?
I think polls have indicated, and I agree, the number one issue in this state right now is healthcare. If people don't improve their life, if they can't see their doctor, if their hospitals don't stay open, if their entire communities are destroyed. Just this week alone, I understand in Los Alamos, they shut down their labor and delivery. Births will now be done in Espanola and Santa Fe. That's not good. We can deal with crime. We can deal with the failing education system. We can deal with building the economy up. But the one area that we can have impact is in health. And never in New Mexico's history have we ever had a healthcare governor. This Governor Day will go down in history, where Susanna gets blamed for mental health, destroying the behavioral health network. This governor will be recognized for destroying healthcare in New Mexico. And if I'm elected, I will be that healthcare governor who not only deals with improving our healthcare system statewide, but then will also deal with all the other issues that stem from that failure.
Duke Rodriguez, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks to Duke Rodriguez and Gwyneth for that conversation. And we were all set to hear from Greg Hull, the third candidate in the Republican race for governor as well, but he canceled on us. Now that you have a better sense of most of the candidates in the GOP race for governor and where they stand, let's take a look at the race itself. The Albuquerque Journal published a poll over the weekend, and while Greg Hull led the pack, a huge number of proven Republican and independent voters remain undecided. 30% of the people Research and Polling Inc. surveyed said they plan to vote for Hull, with Doug Turner 9 points behind at 21% and Duke Rodriguez in a distant third at just 9%. If you do the math, that means a whopping 40% haven't made up their minds. But they do still have time. While early voting started at county clerk's offices on Tuesday, it'll really get going with additional polling sites next Saturday, the 16th. And Election Day, June 2nd, is still weeks out. Research and Polling President Brian Sandroff told the Journal that voters are still familiarizing themselves with the candidates, likely because none have held statewide office. I spoke to Sandroff last week, and he emphasized that his polls are simply a snapshot in time.
It's not meant to predict Election Day unless your final poll is just a matter of days before the election. So this poll is just telling us where we stand today.
We discussed how his team decided on how many independents to include, since this election is the first time they're able to participate in one of the primaries without registering with that party. While Sandroff said Research and Polling isn't sure how many will actually turn out, they went with 12% in last week's prediction of the Democratic race. For the Republican primary, they settled on slightly fewer at 10%.
The secret to our approach was that we called the independents and then we asked them if they were very likely to vote, which primary they're going to participate in. Do they want a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot? So what we learned was there were more people interested in the Democratic ballot than the Republican ballot.
Hull had a double-digit lead over his competitors among men. And while he also polled better among women, his lead over Doug Turner shrunk to just 4%. And there were places where Turner was actually ahead, namely southwestern and eastern New Mexico, though those regions also had the highest number of undecideds. Hull had the widest margin of support in the Albuquerque metro and in north-central parts of the state. Sanderoff told the Journal that's likely a result of Hull serving as mayor of nearby Rio Rancho for more than a decade. The North Central also went harder for Duke Rodriguez than anywhere else, as the only region where he polled in the double digits at 13%. Research and polling's findings differ considerably from an Emerson College survey on the Republican primary race conducted for KRQE-TV just a week earlier. While Hull led in that one too, he was up by 11 instead of just 9 percentage points. And Rodriguez was in second at 10%, with Turner coming in at a mere 9%, compared to his more than 20% finish in Sanderoff's poll. Sanderoff spoke to the difference between the methods of research and polling and Boston-based Emerson College in our interview last week.
You generate a random sample, but it ends up not being as representative as you'd like. We set quotas so that every county will get its fair share based on past election returns. So we go to levels much higher than the national companies. National companies have a disadvantage in that there might be polling in 20 or 30 states, so they really can't get to the finer levels of detail that we can get to, being that we're local.
If you are an independent or unaffiliated voter who would like to participate in the primary election, you can select either a Republican or Democratic ballot when you arrive at a polling place or request an absentee ballot. Early voting has begun at your county clerk's office. Okay, now that we have wrapped our arms around where New Mexico's most successful pollster sees the race on the Republican side a month out, let's get out the shovel and dig a little deeper. To help us with the excavation, we brought in Greg Payne, a former Republican Albuquerque city councilor and state representative. Payne's been out of office for 20 years, but he's kept a sharp eye on state and local politics. Here's that conversation. Greg, thanks so much for being back on the show. We really appreciate it.
Sure, Nash. Thanks for having me back. It's good to be here.
So I just laid out some of the results of Brian Sanderoff's most recent poll of the GOP primary race, and I'd like to get into with you some of the why. What's behind those numbers? What stood out to you in terms of where certain candidates are resonating with people, and what's behind that?
Well, I wasn't surprised by Greg Hull being at 30%, but I thought Doug Turner and Duke Rodriguez would be somewhere around 15% each. So I was surprised when Doug wound up being at 21% and Duke was only at 9%.
And what about some of the demographics? Hull is resonating more with both men and women, but it gets a lot closer between him and Turner when you look just at women and who they're supporting. What do you think's behind that?
I don't know. It could be, and I've jokingly said that, Hull's got the goatee and maybe that appeals to men or something like that. And maybe, Doug is a little more urbane, for lack of a better word. So, but I really don't know. But I think it's important because whoever the nominee is on the GOP side, they're going to have support from women voters.
Sanderoff's poll also broke down kind of the regional divide, and we saw Turner actually ahead in both eastern New Mexico, southwestern New Mexico, that includes Las Cruces, and then Hull far ahead in the Albuquerque metro and north central. Can you break that down a little bit?
Well, so Hull makes sense because he was mayor of Rio Rancho, so Sandoval County. He's been in the Albuquerque media. Again, the surprise for me was Doug Turner doing so well in Little Texas and down by Las Cruces.
Yeah, what's going on there, do you think?
Yeah, it's got to be the oil and gas industry, but for a kid from Albuquerque like Doug is, he grew up in the Old Town area, to have a base already on the east side and down south is pretty remarkable.
And do you think, what will that mean as the campaign continues over these next few weeks, that he's got that base?
Right. No, it's simple. I mean, he can focus on Albuquerque now in the final weeks of the campaign, which is where I think it's going to be won or lost.
Okay. Well, Election Day is a little bit more than 3 weeks away. Let's talk about momentum. Let's talk about money. How do you see this thing playing out as we enter this home stretch? Who's surging? Who's tanking? who's got the money to keep it going.
Well, talking about money, I mean, one of the people who's obviously tanking at 9% is Duke Rodriguez. I think that campaign made a huge mistake because Duke said he had $2 million to spend on the campaign. He should put that money in the bank immediately to show he was serious. He didn't do it for some reason.
What did he do instead?
Well, I think he put like $500,000 in, and he started talking about tranches, like he would release the money as he needed to release the money. That sent a mixed message, I think. Either you're serious about what you say. If he said, I'm going to spend $2 million, then you put the $2 million in the bank. That was a huge mistake.
You think that could have scared some of his competition off?
I think if he had, that's a great point. If he had put the $2 million in the bank, I'm not sure Turner would have run. I'm not sure the oil and gas industry would have gotten involved. I think he would have scared him off, but it turned out to be a bluff. And between Turner and the oil and gas industry, they called the bluff.
Well, in terms of Turner and Hull, what do you make of their war chests and their momentum going into these final weeks?
I'm not sure that Greg Hull has a war chest, and that's his main problem. He doesn't have the money to get his message out.
Okay, and so what does that mean?
That means that Doug Turner does have money, and he's got the oil and gas industry. I believe they have a pack. So I don't think that Doug has to attack Duke or attack Hull. I think all Doug has to do is promote Doug, and he's got the resources to do it.
Okay. Well, I do want to go a little bit deeper into Duke Rodriguez. You mentioned you feel like he's tanking. He fell from second in the Emerson poll in the double digits to a distant third in Sanderoff's poll. What's not resonating about his campaign?
Well, number one, I think people realize that he did live in Arizona. He voted for governor in 2024 in Arizona, and his whole campaign was pretty much waged in the courtroom. It was, the fight to get on the ballot, and then going after Michelle Lujan Grisham over daycare. It's been a courtroom campaign.
But I mean, at the same time, those court cases have kept him in the media for free without having to pay for ads. Why wouldn't that help his case to just have his name out there so much?
So I know that Republicans are not fans of Michelle Lujan Grisham, but I don't know that I would have sued her over daycare. There are a lot of Republicans, going back to Turner and the female vote, who are pro daycare.
And it's the universal child care program.
Right, exactly. Yeah. If I were Duke, if I were helping on that campaign, I would have advised him to sue Michelle Lujan Grisham over guns and gun control, because that's much more of a resonating issue with the GOP primary voters.
So it sounds like, in your opinion, he's not going to win. You're counting him out. If that's the case, what does his presence on the ballot do to Turner and Hull? Where do those voters go?
Here's a real good question. I'm not sure who your typical Duke Rodriguez voter is. I think it's more important for the nominee, who I think is going to be Doug Turner, to reach out to Greg Hull for those voters.
Okay. And you think it's going to be Turner, despite him lagging in this most recent poll, because you say he's got the momentum and he's also got that base in rural New Mexico and can focus now on Albuquerque? Is that why you say that?
And he's got the war chest.
Okay.
And so I don't think at this point, if Duke were to spend the $2 million, I think it's too late in the game for him to really make a dent and to capture the nomination. I just don't see it.
Okay. Well, there's a huge pool of voters to tap for all three of these candidates, because the Sanderoff poll found 40% are undecided on who to vote for in this race. That's massive.
That is. It's huge. And but it kind of speaks to the primary voter. I mean, none of these candidates have really set the world on fire. Doug does have momentum, but you don't see like the huge. The person I'm thinking about is Mamdani in New York, where you had the grassroots on the progressive side just get really excited about his candidacy. I don't really sense that with the grassroots in the GOP right now. Having said, I think Doug's going to win, but I just don't see that energy.
Okay, Sanderoff had said that it may be chalked up to the fact that none of these three have run for statewide office, have held statewide office before. That's not true. Turner has run for statewide office, but none of them have held office. Right. What do you make of that argument? And do you think it's more of what you're saying about a grassroots excitement among the base?
Right. Well, I think there's a lot to that argument. And none of the candidates, with the exception of Duke, none of the candidates have really been on the media or in the TV until recently. I think Turner just came up about 2 weeks ago or something like like that. So it hasn't been as high profile as you might have liked if you're running for governor or to be the GOP nominee.
Do you think, what's the Trump factor? Would somebody aligning themselves closely with the president get folks excited? We saw that in some of the primary races where Trump's supported candidate won in some of these most recent primary candidates over some incumbents. Could that start a fire?
I don't know. We had the primaries in Indiana where 5 or 6 state senators that were viewed as being opposed to Trump were voted out. New Mexico is not Indiana, so there is a MAGA factor, but I don't think a candidate on the GOP side who wants to be serious about the general election is going to just embrace themselves or, wrap themselves up in MAGA red.
Yeah, who do you see as the MAGA candidate in this race, if anyone?
Well, Doug had his fundraiser out at Mar-a-Lago, so I think that's kind of a message, but he's sending the message that, I'm at Mar-a-Lago and that's Trump's place, but on the other hand, he's not embracing himself with Trump.
I asked him if he felt like the invitation had characterized him as the America First candidate. Right. I asked him if he felt that was accurate, and he was a little sheepish about aligning himself with the president or all of his policies.
Well, if he's going to be viable in the general, and I think he will be, he's going to have to really thread the needle on that one.
And doesn't he have to get through the primary first?
He does, but to the extent, getting back to your original question, to the extent that there is a MAGA candidate in the GOP primary, it's Doug Turner.
But are you saying that doesn't help him in New Mexico?
I think it does help him. Especially with some of the voters that might normally go to Greg Hull. And again, that's the biggest block of votes out there, Greg Hull at 30%. If at some point someone who's supporting Hull believes that Doug is a better fit, or Doug is actually the one who went out to Mar-a-Lago, a lot of those votes might go over to Doug.
Right, but then come the general, that might actually hurt him.
I think it was Richard Nixon who said during the primary, you run as far to the right as you can, and then when you get to the general, you head to the middle. So a lot of candidates do that. I think just having the fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago, it's not going to hurt Doug, I don't think, in the general. It's going to be brought up.
Oh, I'm sure it will be.
I'm sure it will be too.
And maybe we'll have you back on to talk about it at that point.
I'd love to.
Thanks so much, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Nash.
Thanks to Greg Payne for hashing out the Republican primary race for governor with us, and to the two candidates for their time. We hope to introduce you to the third name on the ballot, Greg Hull, before you head to the polls, but he canceled on us this week. Before I sign off, one quick point of pride for our station and for our partners at the nonprofit newsroom New Mexico in Depth. The team at Indigenously Positive, Bella Davis and Benjamin Yaza, have stacked 2 more awards on the series' already crowded shelf. The pair took home first and second place honors in the multimedia category at the recent Society of Professional Journalists Top of the Rockies contest. Congrats to Bella and Benjamin. Join us here next week when we will explore the Democratic primary race for governor, including one-on-one interviews with candidates Deb Haaland and Sam Bregman. For New Mexico PBS, I'm Nash Jones. Until then, stay focused.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus is provided by viewers like you.